Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we start, please leave a comment letting me know where you are and what time it is when you're listening to this narration. We want to know where these documented stories go and what times of day or night they go there. It was still recovering from the Civil War's economic and social damage in the fall of 1,857 inches Fayetteville, Arkansas. The town was in a dangerous place between the growing industrial world and the remote hollows where older ways of life continued. It was in the Ozark Mountains. In one of these hollows, about 7 miles northeast of the town's center, people started to notice something strange about the Harmon homestead. The property was a simple 2-story building made of local wood and stone. It was at the end of what was then called Wolf Pen Road, close to a small stream that flowed into the White River. County records from 1875 show that Isaiah Harmon, a Confederate soldier who had come back from the war, and his wife Sarah, bought the homestead. The couple's arrival didn't raise any suspicions among the scattered neighbors. What did raise suspicions was that by the winter of 1877, Isaiah had disappeared, and Sarah Harmon was still living alone on the property, turning away most visitors and becoming more and more reclusive. The first official mention of worry can be found in the minutes of a church meeting at First Presbyterian of Fayetteville on the 12th of December, 1877. Concerns raised about Widow Harmon's welfare through winter months. Committee appointed to deliver provisions, Reverend William Blackwood wrote. This seemingly kind act would be the first recorded entry into what would later be known as the widow's curse. What makes this case especially disturbing is not only what is said to have happened, but also how thoroughly it was kept from official records until a university research project in 1963 brought some documents to light. The Harmon homestead was in a small clearing in the middle of a thick oak and hickory forest. The main house faced east, toward a spring that gave water all year. There was a smokehouse, a small barn, and what tax records called a workshop behind the house. Josephine Carter, whose grandmother was on the church committee, said that the property had an unnatural stillness. Birds didn't sing there, not even in spring. This could be seen as an over-the-top superstition, but similar descriptions can be found in several independent accounts. Sarah Harmon was Sarah Thorne before she got married. She was the daughter of a doctor in Tennessee. County marriage records show that she was 32 when she married Isaiah in 1874. This was a lot older than most brides at the time. Isaiah was 45 years old and a widower. His first wife died of typhoid in 1871. In a short profile in the Arkansas Sentinel from 1875, it was noted that Sarah had studied medical arts under her father's guidance, which was unusual for a woman at the time. She also helped local women during difficult childbirths from time to time. The paper said she was reserved in manner but generous in knowledge. By early 1878, when people in the community started to wonder where Isaiah was, Sarah gave a simple answer. Her husband had gone to St. Louis on business and gotten sick with pneumonia. In a letter to Reverend Blackwood, she said that Isaiah had died in a St. Louis hospital and been buried there. A business partner paid for the burial. At that time, no more questions were asked in public. Isaiah Harmon died on the 3rd of February 1878, according to the county, and pneumonia was the cause. Nobody ever came back to Fayetteville. Dr. Eleanor Winters of the University of Arkansas began looking into 19th century medical practices in rural Arkansas in 1963. What she found was disturbing. Even though this story seems simple at first, she looked at a lot of different things, including the private journals of Dr. James McHenry, who was the county doctor from 1870 to 1889. On the 17th of January, 1878, McHenry wrote, "Visited Harmon Place today regarding neighbor concerns. Widow claims husband in St. Louis. Observed unusual odor from workshop. Widow explained as preservation of herbs and animal specimens for medicinal purposes. Something not right about the woman's eyes. Too steady. Too knowing." This entry, while not very clear, is the first sign that something is wrong at the Harmon homestead. After that, There would be a lot of people going missing, strange behavior, and a growing cloud of suspicion that would hang over the hollow for decades. The letters, journals, newspaper articles, and other documents that survived show a pattern that the authorities of the time mostly ignored, either because they were incompetent, scared, or for some other reason. What happened to those who looked too closely is probably the most disturbing thing. Eleanor Winters would find out that her work on the Harmon case would be the last academic work she ever did. Winters' car was found abandoned in April 1965, 2 years after she started looking into the case. It was near the site of the Harmon homestead. Even after a lot of searching, no sign of Dr. Winters was ever found. In the end, the university said she was dead in 1968. The university archives held her research materials, which included photocopies of original documents and her own extensive notes. The archival record says that those materials were lost when they moved to a new building in 1969. The story that follows is based on documents that still exist, family records, local newspaper articles, and oral histories that different researchers gathered before 1969. The truth about what happened in that hollow is still not fully known, and time and maybe even design have kept it hidden. It is clear that the things that happened to Sarah Harmon and the people who met her had a lasting effect on Fayetteville's history, one that many people want to forget. According to records from Washington County, the Harmon property was bought in 1874. Jacob Finley, the last owner, let the property go to waste after his wife died in 1869. Finley reportedly said only, "Some places don't want people," when asked years later why he sold the valuable land for much less than it was worth. This comment, which his granddaughter wrote about in her memoirs published by the Washington County Historical Society in 1940, was thought to be because he was getting older and sad. Looking back, it sounds more threatening. Before they bought the property, the Harmons were not completely unknown in Fayetteville. Isaiah had family in the area, but before the war, he mostly lived in Memphis. People were interested in Sarah's arrival because there weren't many educated women in the area at the time. Church records show that the couple went to services every week for the first year. Sarah joined the Women's Auxiliary and helped raise money for war widows. Isaiah got a job with a lumber dealer in town and had to make the 7-mile trip several times a week. Their involvement in community life, while not very deep, seemed normal and unremarkable. In an entry from August 1876, Martha Blackwood, the Reverend's wife, wrote in her diary, "Sarah Harmon excused herself from the quilting circle again. 3rd absence this month. Eleanor suggests she may be in a family way, but I observed no signs when last we met. Isaiah mentioned at Sunday's service that his wife is often unwell. There is a coolness between them that wasn't present when they first arrived." Sarah's withdrawal from social activities sped up in 1877. According to merchant ledgers kept in the county historical archives, Isaiah was gathering supplies for both his home and his wife's medical work by the spring of that year. An entry from Wilson's General Store on the 15th of March 1877 shows that I bought glass jars, 6 spirits of alcohol, toque, cheesecloth, and saltpeter. Harmon with a note for Mrs. Harmon's preparations. The last documented public sighting of Isaiah Harmon alive was September 30th, 1877, when he purchased supplies at Wilson's store. The ledger shows a big order that included winter supplies like flour, sugar, coffee, salt, ammunition, lamp oil, and 6 heavy-duty padlocks, which is strange. The storekeeper, Samuel Wilson, later told the sheriff that Isaiah seemed troubled in spirit, but declined to elaborate when questioned. This sentence comes from a short sheriff's report from February 1878, which seems to have been written after people started asking questions about Isaiah's absence. There isn't much information about what happened in the hollow between September 1877 and January 1878. Local lore, recorded decades later, spoke of smoke from the Harmon chimney at odd hours, unusual odors carried on the wind, and a growing reluctance among neighbors to travel near the property after dark. These stories are interesting, but they don't have any modern evidence to back them up, and they might be later additions. The personal papers of Sheriff Thomas Rutledge, which his descendants still have, show that on the 16th of January 1878, A neighbor named Caleb Jenkins heard a man screaming coming from the Harmon property the night before. Jenkins, who lived about half a mile from the Harmons, told the sheriff that he had heard the kind of sound a man makes when he's beyond helping himself. Sheriff Rutledge said he would go to the property the next day. This led to Dr. McHenry's visit mentioned earlier, though curiously, there was no record of the sheriff accompanying him or making a separate visit. Isaiah was officially declared dead in February 1878, and Sarah Harmon's behavior became more and more strange. She didn't leave her land very often. When she did venture into town for supplies, witnesses described her as altered. Rebecca Wilson, the storekeeper's wife, wrote to her sister in February 1878, "Sarah Harmon came in today. First time since before Christmas. She's wearing Isaiah's coat, if you can imagine. Cut her hair short, too. Barely spoke, except to hand over her list. Paid in silver coins, not the store credit they usually used. When Samuel asked after her health, she just stared at him so long he had to look away. Something's not right with that woman now." The widow's isolation might have continued unremarked were it not for the disappearance of Thomas Jenkins, the 19-year-old son of Caleb, in March 1878. According to sheriff's records, Thomas had gone hunting in the woods near the Harmon property and failed to return. Search parties combed the area for 3 days without success. A short note in the sheriff's daily log says that Mrs. Harmon was questioned, but said she didn't know where the Jenkins boy was. The search was called off, and it was thought that Thomas had either fallen into the river or had some other accident. Caleb Jenkins wrote to his brother in April 1878 and said he didn't believe this conclusion. The boy knew those woods since he could walk. Sheriff says likely he fell in the White River, but they never found so much as his gun or hat. I believe someone knows more than they're telling. The widow was seen gathering plants near where Tom went missing just the day before. When I mentioned this to Rutledge, he advised me to let sleeping dogs lie. Something's not right in that hollow, brother. Not right at all. The feeling of unease around the Harmon property grew stronger during the spring and summer of 1878. Church records show that Reverend Blackwood tried to visit Sarah twice but found the property empty, even though smoke was coming from the chimney. Mrs. Harmon's spiritual welfare concerns me greatly. I left a basket of food at the gate because no one answered my call. The dogs barked from inside the house but stopped suddenly. I noticed that the workshop door has a new, heavy lock. The garden is not being taken care of, except for some strange plants I don't recognize. They are not food crops, but something else. I will talk to the elders about what to do. It doesn't look like anything else was done. The widow was left alone, and she would stay that way for several more years, with occasional disturbing events happening. What happened inside that hollow stayed a secret until the winter of 1880, when Sarah Harmon came out of hiding in a way that would make her famous and start what would become known as the widow's curse. As 1878 turned into 1879, Sarah Harmon came to town less often, but when she did, it was more important. Store records show that she only bought supplies every 2 to 3 months and always paid with silver coins or sometimes small gold pieces. This is strange for a woman who is probably a widow and doesn't have a clear source of income. When the banker's wife ran into Sarah by chance and asked her about her money, Sarah is said to have said, "My husband provided for me in ways that will last." At the time, this conversation, which was written down in Margaret Collins's diary, was thought to be about savings or life insurance. Several accounts say that she became thinner and her skin became what one person called parchment-like, yellowed, and too tight. Rebecca Wilson said that her hair, which used to be dark brown, was white as January snow, though she cannot be above 40 years. Her eyes were the most striking feature. Wilson said they had a knowledge in them that makes one want to confess sins never committed. People said these changes were due to grief, hardship, or her rumored experimentation with medicinal herbs and tinctures. Later events would make it look even worse. People noticed the changes in Sarah's body. People were especially interested in the workshop behind the main house. Even when the main house was dark, smoke could be seen coming from its small chimney at strange times. People said they smelled strange things, like sickeningly sweet, like meat gone to turning, or, most interestingly, the copper smell of blood, but stronger, mixed with something like strong flowers. Many people stayed away from the property, but those who drove by said they heard strange noises, like bubbling liquids, a rhythmic scraping, and sometimes low murmuring that was not exactly words, but not animal sounds either. In October 1879, the Peterson family's hunting dog from a nearby farm went missing. James Peterson's journal says that 2 days later, his son found the dog's collar hanging on the fence of the Harmon property. When Peterson, who was young, came to the house to ask questions, he saw Sarah looking out the window upstairs, but she didn't answer his calls. That night, something strange happened on the Peterson farm. Around midnight, all of their animals got upset. Chickens flew off their roosts and horses kicked at their stalls. James Peterson saw strange marks in the dirt outside the barn in the morning. He called them boot prints of a woman, but the stride was too long, as if she'd been running on tiptoe. The most serious disturbance to the uneasy balance happened in December 1879 when a traveling salesman named Hinrich Mueller went missing after being seen heading toward the Harmon property. The owner of a boarding house in Fayetteville reported Mueller missing when he didn't come back as planned. Mueller often traveled a route through the Ozarks selling tools, fabrics, and other goods. Sheriff's records show that Mueller had told several customers that he was going to see the widow up in the hollow, who had asked for certain things on his last visit. Sheriff Rutledge and 2 deputies went to the Harmon property on the 18th of December 1879. The official report only says that Mrs. Harmon said she hadn't seen the peddler in a few weeks and that there was no sign of foul play on the property. However, a deputy named William Fletcher later told his wife a different story about the visit. Mary Fletcher wrote to her sister in a letter found among family papers in 1962. She said that William came home troubled from his visit to the Harmon woman. The sheriff barely looked around and stayed outside while the widow talked to them from her porch. William noticed fresh dirt near the workshop and what looked like drag marks, but when he told Rutledge about it, he told him to mind his own business. On the way back, the sheriff told them both that the widow should not be bothered anymore and that the peddler probably moved on to Bentonville. William says there's more to it, but he won't tell me what. He's been having nightmares since. Mueller was never found, and there are no records of any further investigation. Sheriff Rutledge, who was only 42 years old at the time, strangely quit his job in February 1880, saying he was worried about his health. Soon after that, he and his family moved to Kansas City. His sudden departure added to the growing sense of unease about what was going on in the hollow. Northwest Arkansas had a very cold winter in 1879-1880. Many homes were cut off from the outside world for weeks at a time because of heavy snow. The railroad station's weather records show that temperatures stayed below freezing from mid-December to late February. Several blizzards made things even worse in the area. Sarah Harmon seems to have changed the most during this time when she was forced to be alone. When she came back to town in early March 1880, people who saw her said she had changed a lot. Samuel Wilson, the store owner, wrote in his personal ledger, "Mrs. Harmon came in today after the long winter. I almost didn't recognize her. She has filled out a lot despite the hard season. Her face is fuller, almost youthful again. Her hair is still white but thicker. She bought new dress materials and more medicine supplies. The strangest thing is that she smiled and talked to people she hasn't spoken to in years. She left a jar of salve for Rebecca's chilblains. Rebecca says she won't use it, but I saw that she didn't throw it away either." This apparent youthfulness and friendliness marked the start of a new chapter in the Harmon story, one that would pull others into her orbit with terrible results. In the spring of 1880, the widow in the hollow would get more attention because her isolation turned into a different, but just as troubling, pattern of behavior. Sarah Harmon's behavior and looks changed at the same time she started giving people in town different tinctures, salves, and remedies. Many people were hesitant at first, but as Rebecca Wilson wrote in April 1880, her cure for Mrs. Bradford's eczema worked when nothing else would. People also reported that she was able to help with other problems, such as rheumatism and colic in babies. The exact details of these remedies were never made public. Sarah would only say that they had ingredients not available to ordinary medicine. By the summer of 1880, Sarah had started a small business selling these medicines. Customers would leave money, usually silver coins, in a box at the edge of her property and pick up their medicines from the same place. Sarah didn't often talk to people who needed her help directly. Instead, she left them notes with instructions. People who saw these notes said they were written in a strange way, with formal medical terms mixed in with what looked like coded symbols or abbreviations. No one knows if any of these notes are still around. The remedies themselves were the most disturbing part. In July 1880, Martha Blackwood wrote to her sister about one such treatment. Eliza Jenkins showed me the tonic the widow gave for her female complaint. It was a dark liquid in a blue glass bottle that smelled like iron and something else I couldn't name. What bothered me was the sediment at the bottom, which looked almost like dried blood. But when I brought this up, Eliza got defensive. She says she's felt better than she has in years. Her complexion has improved a lot, I'll admit. But there's something not right about taking internal medicines from a woman who learned who knows what from her father. I reminded Eliza about the peddler who disappeared near that property, and she just smiled strangely and said, "The widow knows things others don't. I worry for her soul." Charles Burke, a land surveyor who was mapping properties along the White River in August 1880, wrote the most detailed account of the Harmon property during this time. His field notes, preserved in county records, include observations of the Harmon Hollow that go beyond mere topographical details. Property appears well maintained despite single occupant. Main house solid. New shingles on roof. Workshop behind house larger than typical for region. Reinforced door with 2 padlocks. Multiple small gardens with plants unfamiliar to me. Not typical crops. Some appear medicinal, others unknown. Observed smoke from workshop chimney despite hot weather. Approach to property marked by animal bones hanging from tree branches, possibly to deter pests from gardens, though unusual arrangement. Spring house locked. Second padlock on well cover. Most notably, soil around workshop unusually dark and rich compared to surrounding area. Vegetation there exceptionally vigorous. Mrs. Harmon appeared briefly at window, but did not respond to greetings. Completed survey from distance, as felt unwelcome. Curious note. Observed what appeared to be fresh grave sites beyond orchard, marked only with field stones. Too small for human burials. Possibly livestock, though no livestock visible on property. Burke's notes are important not only because they are very detailed, but also because they are one of the few official documents that describe the property while Sarah lived there that are still around today. A fire in the courthouse in 1887 reportedly destroyed most of the county records related to the Harmon case, but newspapers at the time did not report on any such fire. In the fall of 1880, something new happened in the Hollow. Church records show that a young woman named Mary Thorne came to Fayetteville in September and said she was Sarah's niece from Tennessee. She rented a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house in town, but people saw her spending most of her days at the Harmon property. People said Mary was in her early 20s, well-educated, and looked a lot like Sarah, who had come to Fayetteville years before. Mary's presence changed the way things worked in the Hollow. Sarah had kept her distance from the people in town, but Mary talked to them freely, often collecting payments for medicines and giving treatments. She was honest about helping her aunt get ready for surgery and learning the family business. A number of stories talk about how pale Mary was and how she never seemed to tan or burn in the sun, even though she spent hours walking between town and the Hollow. People started to wonder about the relationship between the two women. They didn't see each other very often. Mary was in town while Sarah stayed away, or Mary was at the property while Sarah made fewer and fewer trips to town. Some people started to wonder if they were the same person because no one had seen Mary arrive by stage or train. She had just shown up one day, as if she had come out of the Hollow itself. By the end of 1880, the widow's remedies, as they were known in the area, had a small but loyal group of customers. Users reported feeling more energetic, having better skin, and getting relief from chronic pain. In some cases, they said they had a clarity of thought that reveals truths otherwise hidden. These benefits came with costs that went beyond the silver coins exchanged. Users became unusually pale, like Mary, and had vivid dreams that often included the Harmon property. In some cases, concerned family members noticed changes in the users' personalities. Eliza Jenkins, one of the most devoted users of these remedies, wrote in her private diary in December 1880, "The tonic brings such relief, I can hardly remember life before it. When I take it, I can feel it moving through me, touching every part with its warmth. The dreams are a small price to pay. Last night, I dreamed again of the workshop, the tables, the glass jars, the bundles hanging from the rafters. In the dream, I understand everything. See how it all connects." The widow says, "This is normal, that the medicine opens pathways in the mind as it heals the body. I believe her. Sometimes I think I can hear Isaiah whispering from the corner of the room, but that must be fancy." This diary entry is especially important because it is the first time that people who used the remedies said they had dreams about the workshop, a place most of them had never been in real life. It's even more disturbing that they mentioned Isaiah, who had been dead for almost 3 years at this point. By the end of 1880, the widow's power had spread beyond her hollow. A small group of regular customers, mostly women, had made a protective circle around her practice. In November, Reverend Blackwood talked about his worries about the remedies from the pulpit. The next Sunday, several important church members, including the wives of town leaders, were noticeably missing. The Arkansas Sentinel ran a short article about this strange event, using the careful language that small-town newspapers use to talk about controversy without getting sued. Certain home remedies gaining popularity among Fayetteville's ladies have raised questions of propriety and safety. While we make no judgment on efficacy, we remind readers that traditional medical consultation remains advisable for serious conditions. So, in early 1881, something happened that would break the strange balance around the Harmon Hollow. This discovery could no longer be ignored or explained away. It would give the widow's curse its name and cast a shadow over Fayetteville that some people say has never fully lifted. Northwest Arkansas had the coldest January ever in 1881. The White River froze so solidly that wagons could cross it, which is a rare event recorded in local weather records. It was during this freezing weather that Jacob Wilson, Samuel Wilson's 15-year-old son, found something horrible that set off the events that followed. New Sheriff Thomas Bradford recorded Jacob's statement, in which he said that he had been following a wounded deer through the woods about a quarter of a mile from the Harmon property. The blood trail took him to a small ravine where he found human remains instead of his deer. "At first, I thought it was old roots or branches under the snow," he said. "Then I saw a hand sticking up, fingers curled like they were reaching. I brushed away some snow and saw it wasn't just one body, but parts of several, all frozen together. Some had clothes, some didn't. They looked preserved somehow, not rotted like you'd expect. I ran all the way home without looking back." The next day, Sheriff Bradford and Dr. Andrew Phillips, who had taken over for the retired Dr. McHenry, looked into the area. The official report, which is one of the few documents from this time that has survived, says that they found human remains representing at least 3 individuals in various states of dismemberment. Parts seem to have been preserved through a process similar to tanning leather. There was no way to identify the remains on site. The area shows signs of animal disturbance, which could explain why they were moved from their original burial site. Sheriff Bradford's visit to the Harmon property was recorded on the 15th of January, 1881. The sheriff's visit to the Harmon property, which is recorded, took place on the 15th of January, 1881. He said in his report that he talked briefly with Sarah Harmon, who was shocked by what she heard, and suggested that the remains might be victims of the war, only now coming to light as the ground shifts. There was no mention of Mary Thorne being there during this visit. The report ends by saying, "There is no evidence linking these remains to any current resident of the area, and it says that the investigation will continue." There are no follow-up reports in the county records. Most of what happened next is recorded in private letters and diary entries. Rebecca Wilson wrote to her sister on the 20th of January, 1881, "The whole town is buzzing about Jacob's discovery. Some say those poor souls were travelers who ran afoul of bandits. Others whisper they were victims of the widow's experiments. Samuel says the sheriff told him privately that one of the hands had a distinctive ring that matched the description of something the peddler Mueller was known to wear, but nothing will come of it. Too many powerful people have been taking the widow's remedies. Bradford's own wife is among them, though he may not know it. The discovery had an immediate impact on the widow's remedies market. Records from the store show that Mary Thorne was last seen in town on January 17, 2 days after the sheriff went to the Hollow. She collected overdue payments, gave out several prepared treatments, and, according to witnesses, acted with unusual urgency. By the end of January, Sarah Harmon and Mary Thorne had both disappeared from Fayetteville. Both Sarah Harmon and Mary Thorne were gone from Fayetteville by the end of January. On the 3rd of February 1881, Sheriff Bradford wrote a report that said, "Harmon property found abandoned. No sign of Sarah Harmon or her niece, Mary Thorne. House largely emptied of personal belongings. Workshop locked. No legal grounds to force entry without evidence of crime on premises." The report does not link this disappearance to the human remains that were found nearby just weeks before. After that, there was a time of silence about the Harmon case that seems planned in hindsight. There are no newspaper articles that talk about the remains or the missing person. In March 1881, church records show that Reverend Blackwood was moved to a parish in Missouri. This ended his record-keeping of local events. Over the next few months, a number of families who were known to use the widow's remedies moved away from Fayetteville for a variety of reasons, including health issues and business opportunities in other places. The Harmon property stayed empty and undisturbed until October 1881, when a fire of unknown origin destroyed the workshop and the main house. When neighbors saw the fire and got to the property, both buildings had already turned to ash and foundation stones. The county recorder said that the property was abandoned and that the taxes were not paid. It would eventually go back to the county, but no new building would happen on the site for decades. The story might have ended there, with another frontier mystery lost to time, if it weren't for what happened to the people who used the widow's remedies regularly. A pattern that started in late 1881 and lasted through 1882 led to the name the Widow's Curse. One by one, former customers started showing signs that doctors at the time couldn't explain. The first and worst case was that of Eliza Jenkins. Dr. Phillips's notes say that she came to see him in November 1881 with very pale skin, tissue loss even though she was still hungry, and periods of confusion that were followed by periods of unusual clarity. Dr. Phillips said that her skin was like preserved hide, with less elasticity and a yellowish cast. When asked about the widow's remedies, Eliza reportedly got upset and said she had hidden away a supply that would last her until the return. She died in December 1881, and Dr. Phillips said the cause of death was wasting disease of unknown origin. Similar cases came after this one. Rebecca Wilson started showing symptoms in February 1882, even though she had been skeptical before. Samuel Wilson wrote in his diary about how his wife was getting worse. Rebecca talks about dreams where she goes to the Hollow and sees the workshop from the inside. She says the widow is showing her how the preparations are made. Nonsense, of course, fever dreams. But she knows things about that place that she shouldn't know, like tools and containers that I never saw myself. Dr. Phillips suggested sending her to a hospital in St. Louis, but she becomes frantic at the thought of leaving Fayetteville. She says she has to be here when Sarah comes back. By the summer of 1882, Dr. Phillips had recorded 7 cases with similar symptoms, all of whom had previously used the remedies. He wrote to a doctor friend in Little Rock, "I've come to believe these patients are suffering from some form of poisoning, perhaps cumulative in nature." The substances in the so-called remedies appear to have preserved these people from inside, in some fashion similar to the tanning process used on hides. As the effects wear off without new doses, the body begins to break down in unpredictable ways. Most disturbing are the psychological symptoms, the shared dreams, the conviction that the widow is somehow still present, the belief that she will return. Several have reported seeing lights at night on the burned property, though investigation shows no evidence of recent human presence. The pattern of sickness and death went on through 1882 and into 1883. 9 of the 12 known regular users of the widow's remedies died within 2 years of her disappearance. The other 3 left Fayetteville, and no one knows what happened to them. Dr. Phillips took tissue samples from a number of victims and put them in alcohol to keep them for future research. It is said that these samples were sent to a medical school in Philadelphia in 1884, but there is no record of them being received or studied. As the people who were directly affected by what locals now openly called the widow's curse disappeared, the story itself began to fade from public discussion. The burned land went back to nature, and the forest slowly took back the clearing. By 1890, there wasn't much left to show where the Harmon homestead used to be. There were only the stone foundations and a small family cemetery where Isaiah's parents had been buried decades before. Isaiah himself did not have a marker there. If it weren't for a string of disappearances in the area between 1885 and 1895, the story might have been completely forgotten. 5 people who were traveling along the road that went by the old Harmon property were reported missing. Investigations didn't lead to any clear answers, but local officials said that wild animals or bandits were likely to blame. There was no official link between the 2 events, but local legends kept the connection alive. It wasn't until 1963 that academics became interested in the case again, when Dr. Eleanor Winters started her ill-fated study of 19th-century medical practices in rural Arkansas. Her finding of Dr. Phillips's private papers and her research into county records brought the Harmon case back into the public eye, but only a little. Many people thought it was too coincidental to ignore that Winter went missing in 1965 while visiting the site. What happened in the hollow between 1877 and 1881 is still up for debate. Because the records that are still around are incomplete, there are many ways to read what happened. Did Sarah Harmon kill people and use their bodies to make medicine? Was Mary Thorne really her niece? Or was she something else? What made the people who used her remedies have such strange symptoms? And maybe the most troubling thing is, did Sarah and Mary really leave the area, or did they just move to a different place to keep doing what they were doing? According to county land records, a woman named Sarah Thorne bought land near Eureka Springs in 1885. This is about 40 miles from Fayetteville. The description fits that of the widow's niece, but there was no direct link at the time. In 1890, local newspapers said that Sarah Thorne had built up a reputation as a healer who could help with a wide range of health problems. By 1895, she had also vanished, leaving behind a property that would soon burn down under strange circumstances. Records from Mountain Home, Arkansas, from 1897 to 1901, Springfield, Missouri, from 1903 to 1908, and Joplin, Missouri, from 1910 to 1915, show similar patterns. In each place, a woman who looked like Sarah or Mary would become a healer, gather a group of followers, and then vanish just before or after human remains were found nearby. The pattern suggests that there were more than one woman, each training a replacement before moving on or dying of natural causes. The last time someone who matched their description was seen was in St. Louis in 1919, when City Health Department records say they looked into complaints about a Mrs. Thorne who was selling questionable preparations from a basement apartment. When officials went to the address, they found that it had just been vacated. Neighbors said that the woman had left suddenly with her daughter or niece. The officer who was looking into the case noticed a strange smell in the apartment and signs of medical testing, but they didn't find any reason to take further action. After 1919, the trail goes cold. There have been no more records that match their descriptions or methods. We don't know if the lineage stopped there or if they just started being more careful about keeping records. What we do know is that the land where the Harmon homestead used to be is still empty. The area is now part of a national forest, but there are no official maps that show it. People who live nearby still talk about strange things that happen in that part of the woods, like lights seen at night where there are no trails, strange smells carried by the wind, and sometimes the sound of a woman's voice when no one is there. Hikers who get close to the site have said they found small groups of bones arranged in patterns, and they were still fresh, even though there were no signs of recent human activity. Rangers say these stories are either lies or exaggerations, but a lot of people stay away from the area, especially at night. What happened during a forest fire that swept through parts of the Ozarks in 1952 may be the most telling thing. Forest Service records show that the fire burned all the way to the edges of the old Harmon property, but then it stopped suddenly, even though the winds were pushing it that way. Aerial photos show a clear line where the fire stopped, leaving an island of untouched forest in the shape of what was once the Harmon Hollow. Fire scientists said this was because of the way the land and wind were at the time. Local stories told a different story. The widow protects what's hers, even now. Dr. Winters started her research in 1963. She talked to a number of older people who said they remembered the events firsthand. Her talk with Catherine Wilson, the daughter of Samuel and Rebecca, who was a young girl at the time of the events, was the most interesting. Catherine, who is now in her 90s, told Winters, "Mother took the widow's medicine until the end. Even when she was dying, she insisted it wasn't the remedy killing her, but the lack of it. Said if the widow would just come back, she could be saved." On her last night, Mother sat up suddenly and pointed to the corner of the room, said, "She's come for me at last," died smiling. Father burned everything Mother had hidden away. Bottles, notes, a small cloth pouch she kept under her pillow. Said he could smell the hollow on those things, like meat and flowers and something else he couldn't name. Dr. Winters went missing near the old Harmon property 2 months after this interview was recorded. The last thing she wrote in her research journal was on the 12th of April 1965, "Meeting local guide tomorrow to locate exact site of workshop foundation." Historical Society photos suggest stone footings may still be visible. Strange dreams last night, saw workshop interior clearly. Layout matches descriptions in Phillips's papers exactly. Unusual sense of anticipation today, as if approaching a significant discovery. Guide mentioned local belief that the area is somehow protected. Scientifically absurd, of course. But the persistence of such beliefs over decades suggests a psychological impact to these events that transcends ordinary local legends. The journal was found in her abandoned vehicle. Despite thorough searches, no sign of Dr. Winters herself was ever found. The university's decision to declare her dead in 1968 and the loss of her research materials during an archive move in 1969 effectively ended any formal academic investigation into the Harmon case. Today, the widow's curse is mostly a local legend, a story told around campfires to explain the strange feeling in that part of the forest. People who hike there sometimes still have strange things happen to them, like watches that stop working, compasses that spin uselessly, and the feeling that someone is watching them from just beyond the tree line. Most of them are reasonable people who can't explain why they suddenly feel the need to leave the area quickly. The reports of hikers running into a woman on a trail that doesn't show up on any maps, which happen about once every 10 years, are probably the most disturbing. People always say she is middle-aged, but she looks ageless, has white hair and eyes that see more than they should. She tells hikers how to get where they need to go, gives them advice on local plants, or even gives them a home remedy for whatever is bothering them, like a headache, a twisted ankle, or a persistent cough. People who agree to it say they heal very quickly, and then have dreams of a workshop where something terrible and wonderful happens, a change they can almost, but not quite, remember when they wake up. Is there any truth to these modern experiences? Are they the result of suggestion, or is it folklore's ability to change how people see things? Or is there something that started with Sarah Harmon and her workshop of horrors in 1877 that still goes on in that hollow? The original papers are either lost, scattered, or sealed. The people who saw it happen are all dead. The only thing left is the story that has been passed down through the years. It's interesting that, even in this day and age of documentation and explanation, that part of the Ozarks is still unexplored and unmapped. If you drive on a back road northeast of Fayetteville, near where Wolf Pen Road used to be, pay attention to how you feel as you pass a certain point. People who know the area say you'll know it when the birds stop singing and the air feels heavier than it did before. Most locals would tell you to keep driving if you feel like there are eyes watching you from the trees. If you meet a woman with white hair who offers you something to help you, remember what Mary Thorne said in her last appearance in Fayetteville: "What sustains also consumes." We may never know the whole truth about what happened in that hollow. Maybe that's for the best. Some mysteries once solved are hard to forget, and some knowledge comes with a cost that few people would be willing to pay.